Hey y'all, Eli here. Today we're talking about Stellar Blade, which is the PS5's 10th exclusive, a shockingly low number for a nearly 4-year-old console. Before it, only the Demon's Souls remake, Spider-Man 2, and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth garnered great reviews, so a lot was riding on Stellar Blade's release. Not just for Sony, a company trying to convince half of its user base to ditch the geriatric PS4, but for Switch Up, the game's South Korean game developer releasing its first console game ever. Stellar Blade isn't perfect, but it mostly delivers on the excellent action experience we were promised. I want to interrupt quickly to mention that this channel is brand new, and so I'd really appreciate your support. Please don't forget to rate, like, and subscribe. It's greatly appreciated. Stellar Blade takes place on an Earth overrun by Naytiba, grotesque and hostile beings of unknown origin. The only humans left are those that live on a colony in space. Players control Eve, a combatant sent from the colony to liberate Earth from the Naytiba. When Eve arrives on Earth, she learns that the planet is still home to a few remaining humans, most of whom have settled in a seemingly abandoned city called Zion. Allying herself with Zion's remaining residents, Eve sets out to free Earth of the Naytiba and to learn of the planet's dark past. The premise is interesting at the outset, but Stellar Blade fails to craft a compelling story. For most of the game, Eve is tasked with finding 4 hypercells to power Zion, a series of glorified fetch quests that forego story development. As a result, Stellar Blade funnels all of the major story elements into the last few hours of the game. Because the writers fail to adequately pace the story, the endgame revelations are eminently predictable, and the narrative is presented in a haphazard and sometimes confusing way. The game also misses an opportunity to advance the story's ancillary elements through its many side quests. Virtually none of the side quests offer meaningful rewards, nor do they add important contributions to the story. It's unfortunate because the underlying plot beats have a lot of promise and, had they been executed well, could have made for a captivating narrative. Caring for the story is even more difficult because Stellar Blade fails to develop its stride characters. Eve grew up in an isolated environment, so she lands on Earth with little understanding of Earth's history or human social norms. The setup is interesting because Eve came to liberate Earth, but she barely understands the humans who inhabit it. Unfortunately, Eve's development, like many of the other story elements, fail to capitalize on its promise. Eve lacks emotion, coming off as cold and socially awkward for the game's entire duration. As a result, it is difficult to care about Eve or the broader mission. Still, Stellar Blade's varied backdrops are captivating. Players travel through abandoned urban areas featuring several different languages, explore large natural expanses, and spend time in the swashbuckling city of Zion. Many of the locales have interesting details, and all of them are visually impressive. I especially love surveying the desolate urban environments whose eerie emptiness painted an intriguing picture of life before the Naytiba. These are some of the game's only attempts at world building, and they are much appreciated. Unfortunately, navigating Stellar Blade's beautiful world was often frustrating. Unlike other action games, Eve poorly attaches to environmental elements. For example, Eve frequently refuses to latch onto ladders, a simple task in most other games. Similarly, the jumping physics were janky, leading me to miss my target sometimes. The frustration was exacerbated by the fact that Eve takes significant fall damage, so she would sometimes die after an unsuccessful jump. Where the game really shines is its combat. Like other action games, success in Stellar Blade hinges on pulling off combos and properly timing dodges and parries. Oddly, players must time their dodges and parries a moment before an attack hits Eve, rather than timing the actions at the moment of contact. It takes a little bit of time to adjust to the system, but successfully pulling off maneuvers feels rewarding and after time, intuitive. As Eve performs standard combos, parries, and dodges, she'll build up 2 energy bars, allowing the use of beta and burst skills. Beta and burst skills can change the tide of battle, by, for example, dealing massive damage, disrupting an adversary's attack, breaking an enemy's shield, or buffing Eve's combat abilities. Because the game allows burst and beta energy to be stockpiled, Eve can use several skills in a row, multiplying their impact. This introduces an interesting strategic element, requiring players to decide how best to ration these powerful abilities. Midway through the game, Eve acquires the ability to engage in ranged combat using a variety of firearms. At first, the ranged weapons did little to mix up the gameplay. I preferred Eve's physical combat because it felt more powerful, and I would quickly deplete the firearm's limited ammunition. The ranged combat began to feel more meaningful as I upgraded and unlocked more weapons, but it still came second fiddle to Eve's physical attacks. Although there was no point at which I preferred to use firearms over Eve's regular skills, the more powerful weapons could sometimes be decisive in a close battle. Unfortunately, there are a few sections where Eve is forced to use only ranged weapons, which was frustrating. Eve also accumulates skill points over time, which players can use to unlock new combos and upgrade Eve's skills. Ironically, unlocking the skills made the combat more forgiving. For example, I had difficulty dodging perfectly at the beginning of the game, but timing became noticeably easier as I upgraded Eve's dodge window. Still, I appreciated the sense of progression and reward. Of course, the Nativa became more sophisticated and aggressive to contradict Eve's growing capabilities. Fortunately, combat rarely got boring or easy because of the excellent enemy variety. Some Nativa attack in groups, 4 or 5 at a time, or from unexpected places, like trying to hit Eve from below ground. Others will use complicated movesets, unleashing 4 or 5 attacks in a row and requiring Eve to perfectly time several parries or dodges in quick succession. Things are especially challenging when fighting several different enemy types at once. At times, these fights can become frustrating because it is difficult to simultaneously string together a combo and parry different enemy attacks every 2 seconds, but as a result, surviving these onslaughts felt particularly rewarding. My only complaint about the Nativa is that because most share the same grotesque style, they rarely have unique aesthetics. Some players may find the consistency appealing, but I would have preferred a greater stylistic diversity. Bayonetta and Devil May Cry also have their share of uggos, but they contrast that aesthetic with other types of enemy styles. Unfortunately, outside of a few notable exceptions, Shift Up does not really do that here. Like the game's other enemies, the boss fights were sophisticated, varied, and satisfying. The last few boss fights were particularly challenging. They moved quickly and relentlessly, requiring near-perfect maneuvers. The final boss, however, truly felt unfair. Even after reducing the difficulty mode, I had significant issues defeating it. The boss employed 2 instant kill attacks, and I grew disillusioned after repeatedly completing 80% of the boss battle without a problem, but then dying in a single hit. Maybe I needed a, quote, baby mode instead of an easy mode, but from what I've read on the online forums, I was not the only one feeling this way. Fortunately, any frustration was tempered by the fact that there was no penalty for death, and the game's forgiving approach incentivized experimentation with different styles. Ultimately, Stellar Blade is an excellent contribution to the PS5's short list of exclusives. The game's combat is top class, and its environments are a delight to explore. Although Shift Up's failure to capitalize on the narrative's potential is disappointing, the moment-to-moment gameplay more than makes up for that deficiency. I'm optimistic about Stellar Blade's sequel, seemingly already in development, and I'm sure it will unleash Shift Up's full potential. This game is worth getting, especially as one of the few PS5 exclusives. Stellar Blade gets an 8.5 out of 10. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next review.